Thank you all for coming. Welcome. The first thing I think to say is that I'll be covering quite a lot of ground. There'll be quite a lot of information in this workshop. So you don't have to furiously take notes. A lot of that information can be found in more detail in this small booklet that we've provided. But you won't get it yet. You'll get it later on at the end of the session. So as I say, there's a lot of information, but don't worry, it can be found here. So as Martha said, I'll be talking today about using surveys to understand and improve foreign language programs. A lot of practical advice on that topic. And in fact, there's quite a lot of practical advice available to you, a number of books in the literature on how to do surveys, some of it specific to language programs. And a lot of that literature will typically address the following steps, these common steps in developing a survey and using a survey. They include planning a survey project, developing a survey, administering the survey, analyzing and presenting and interpreting data, and reporting results. And certainly I'll be focusing on many of these things, or all of these things as well. A common emphasis is, at this stage, in the planning stages, to make surveys as useful as possible and to provide as much productive information as possible is to focus on specifically what people want to know in the planning stages, in the form of research questions, maybe survey objectives. Anyhow, this sort of terminology signifies being very clear about what you're trying to investigate using a survey methodology. And I'll be naturally focusing on that as well. But I'll be adding two additional components, crucial components. How the information will be used and who will be using that information. So in addition to knowing what you want to look at and using a survey to do it, potentially, I'll be making the point, trying to advocate for being very clear about specifying how the information will be used and who will be using that information. And in fact, those sorts of decisions and establishing and being clear about those sorts of ideas should come before, let me just put that back, should come before any decision about using a survey at all. And those components comprise sort of the beginning stages of a use-driven evaluation process, which I'll be making the argument should happen first before a decision is made to use a survey in your language evaluation efforts. First, though, a question for you to discuss amongst yourselves. Have you used surveys in your programs, or do you use them currently? What were you trying to find out, or what are you trying to find out? And how was the information used, or how was the information used? Maybe just discuss this with somebody sitting nearby for a few moments. A moment. I'll continue. Let me press on. I'll be interested to hear some of those experiences with surveys. But let me show you an example of a survey used to understand and improve a language program to demonstrate a few ideas. So this was a teacher training development evaluation project. So on the left-hand side is what people wanted to know, and on the right-hand side, how the information was used. And what this group wanted to know was whether language courses could be improved with graduate teacher assistant teacher training. They wanted to know the type of training course best suited to department needs. They wanted to get suggestions for format and content for a GTA training course, and that's all. They used a survey to find out about these things. And how was the information used? They generated better understandings of graduate teacher assistants and faculty views on foreign language teacher training. They got some recommendations for a teacher training program on the topics of teacher methods and practice, assessment, grammar pedagogy, SLA theory. These things should be a part of the teacher training program. This is the recommendation. And in fact, they developed, finally, a teacher training course. And indeed, and another thing, they increased support for future training efforts. So by doing this, they generated some support from administration to engage in similar efforts. And indeed, the group involved engaged in in all of these steps. Perhaps, though, the crucial difference was that before they planned to do a survey, before even the decision to take a survey was taken, these three things were established first, prior to any decision about a survey. Who was going to use the information from some evaluation, investigatory process, how it was going to be used, and what specifically they wanted to know. And after that was established, then they thought about potential tools that would tell them the information that they wanted to know about, and it would enable them to do the things that they said they wanted to do. A number of options. And it was after this process, the survey was chosen, and then they embarked on that survey process. So let's look at the example again. And so like this constitutes a use-driven evaluation system, or at least the beginning stages, being clear about these things and then choosing tools. So in fact, this example looked rather different at the very beginning. So what people wanted to know, typically in an evaluation process, that's expressed as an evaluation question, not unlike a research question. So that should come, right? Their evaluation questions were the following. What kind of training course could best respond to the department's needs? What are the training needs of the GTAs in terms of foreign language teaching? What are the needs of the coordinators in terms of their interaction with the GTAs? What training program, format, and content could best accommodate the needs of the stakeholders? So on the basis of that, they specified a number of uses prior. What they wanted to do was identify content and format for a FLT training course that different stakeholders would find appropriate. Provide an empirical basis for the integration of meaningful foreign language teacher training content into weekly GTA coordinator meetings. And judge the quality of undergraduate foreign language teaching. A survey was used, and many of those uses were realized. But crucially, these elements were in place first, and then a decision to use a survey. And this is what we would advocate. This is a use-driven evaluation system, at least the beginning stages. These stages first, and then decisions about tools. So maybe the crucial question is, how do you go from, say, uses of information, uses of information and evaluation questions, to the particular tools needed, and a survey, potentially? Well, imagine this question, what are the training needs of the GTAs in terms of foreign language teaching? Which tool is best to answer this question? Which tool is best to generate information that can be used? An intermediary step is recommended at this stage, and that is to identify indicators. What are indicators? This: sources and types of information or phenomena used to answer an evaluation question. Let me explain, or further explain, by way of an analogy. Imagine the following evaluation question. Is the surf going to be good at Kailua? What? I enjoy surfing. I really enjoy surfing, maybe a bit too much. So does John Norris, who is my advisor. And Kailua is a place in Hawaii. It's a surfing beach. And it also happens to be John Norris's favorite surfing beach. And so it's in my interest to know if the surf at this beach is going to be good or bad. That's good surf, that's bad surf, right? Now we want to know. And it can be a quite unpredictable place. The surf's not good there very often. And to know if the surf is good there often, there are a number of things that would indicate whether it's going to be good or bad. Things that we keep an eye on. Things like swell size, swell direction. Swell is waves. Swells are waves. Swell period. That's not important. Tide, wind speed, wind direction, and I think that's all. So if we know those things, we have information on those things, those phenomena, we can have a pretty good idea whether or not the surf's going to look like the top picture or the bad picture. Take my word for it, the top picture is good, the bottom picture is bad for surfing. But these phenomena, let's say, are distinct from tools, and this is the point that I want to make. If we want to find out about swell size, swell direction, swell period, well, a wave buoy, some scientific instrumentation tells us that information. If we want to find out about tide, well, an acoustic tide gauge tells us about that information. If we want to know about wind speed, wind direction, a windsock. Or we just check the internet. Anyhow, the distinction is here, I'm trying to separate the phenomenon itself from some type of tool that tells you about the phenomenon. And in the same way, imagine the following question, the following evaluation question. What types of classroom activities and assessments were most helpful for student learning? This is a group came up with this very question. So what would be an indicator? What would indicate helpfulness of activities and helpfulness of assessments, do you think? A quick example, student opinions might, right? Their satisfaction with class assessments and activities. Right? So can you just shout out others, potentially? And remember, these are not tools, right? Don't say, oh, surveys would tell you that, or interviews. No, what are the phenomena themselves, the student opinions, the things that the tools are getting at? Others.
Student engagement, time on task.
Perfect, indeed. Student engagement, time on task, right? Yeah. Precisely, at this level of abstraction. Others that come to mind.
I wasn't performing the following task because it's on app.
Great, perfect. Yeah, so some of these will come up, yeah. Others? Possibly not, that's fine. But these are on the money. Yeah, sorry?
Teachers' impressions about which activities seem to lead the most success.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, precisely. I'll move on. Some of these are encompassed, right? So instructor opinions, right? Perceptions of student learning, enjoyment, participation, motivation. Instructors are going to have some sense of the helpfulness of activities in the class assessments generally. Maybe student actions, observe student participation, motivation, enthusiasm. Somebody goes and watches, right? Student performances, right? So demonstrated learning on assessment and assignment. So these would be indicators of helpfulness of assessments and class activities. And so maybe you can see that now at this stage, we might be able to find some tools that tap into or reveal student opinions, instructor opinions, student actions, student performances, right? Student opinions, instructor opinions, surveys, interviews, focus groups. Student performances, maybe some documents, student work. The other maybe just quick point to make here is there might be some, if you went through this process, there might be some disagreement on indicators. There might be some disagreement on the type of tools that are best suited to reveal these types of phenomena. And the key thing to do is to have consensus, to have agreement amongst people who are involved in the evaluation work and developing your evaluation project. Anyhow, moving on. So it's probably at this stage where a choice to use a survey becomes possible, maybe. All right. A few other things to keep in mind if it seems like a survey is the right choice, right? So what surveys typically get at the following things. Respondent background, reported behaviors, actions, habits, personal history, attitudes, beliefs, opinions, interests, values, aspirations, expectations, knowledge, facts and information, abilities. A useful one, perhaps, for you is self-rated language proficiency. To what degree are you able to X? Very well, not at all. Fill it out. Priorities, identifications of problems, identifications of solutions. Surveys have certain strengths and weaknesses. Strengths are they're economical, cheap, quick, more people can participate. It's easy to compile and analyze data. If you're using an online survey tool, often you'll just get a file that can be opened in Excel or SPSS or some other statistical software package. No interviewer bias, respondent anonymity. Weaknesses, they're unsuitable for collecting in-depth information. The responses are a bit simplified. Careless feedback, potentially. Impersonal, low response rate, lack of opportunity to follow up. Poorly written questions may introduce bias. And a bit later on, we'll talk about some potential issues on this topic and things to avoid. But of course, there's various ways to get at opinions, perceptions, etc. You could use a survey, you could use an interview, you could use a focus group. And it just depends maybe what your information needs are. For example, I won't go through all of this, but the first one, if you need quick and efficient data collection analysis, well, a survey might be the best choice. If you wanted something like number 11, in-depth, detailed, rich information, survey's not so good. An interview might be a better choice. The last, number 15, if you wanted some kind of group dynamic where knowledge comes out of a group of people interacting together, then maybe a focus group. So these are things to keep in mind. This chart is in here if you want to look at it in further detail. Other factors to consider. Respondent motivation. Are people going to want to fill out the survey for whatever reason? Are people able to supply the information? For example, if it's alumni, do they have a sufficiently recent memory of what you're asking about? Too much time would have gone past. Language skills, accessibility of respondents. Do you have addresses, email addresses? Attitudes towards survey research. And this is for people involved in the survey project. Do some people regard survey data as soft evidence? They shouldn't, but maybe they do. That might need to be taken into consideration. So given all that, you've gone through all of those steps, considered all of those things. Is the survey the best choice? And if so, then we could start with the remainder of this process that I described at the beginning of the presentation. So let's move on. Developing the survey. What's involved in this? Determining information needs. I'll explain what that is. Writing items. Formatting the layout. Editing. Piloting. The first one, determining information needs. Imagine you had you arrived at the following indicators. Satisfaction with general program elements. Satisfaction with courses. Satisfaction with learning resources. Now the next step would be to maybe write items and start developing the instrument itself. That might be a slightly vague set of ideas to start writing items. And what you might want to do is break those ideas down into more detail. So general program elements, courses, learning resources, you might want to have a number of more detailed sub-indicators, if you like. If you did that, it would be very easy to then start to write your items. You'd have a rather detailed list, which could be used to write items. It's a recommended intermediary step. Let's leave it at that. So imagine you've got your information needs. The next step is to write items. So maybe we'll go through the various item types. Two types, open response and closed response. Open response, what are your immediate plans for graduation? So you can see the respondent is free to write whatever they like, respond in the way that they like. Closed response, they're free to respond in the way that they like, given the choices that you have provided for them. You can see blah, 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 choose all that apply, mother, father, sibling, grandfather, mother, aunt, uncle. Various types of open response items. Short answer, we just saw that example previously. Specific, what language have you studied in the past? So they'd write the language there. Clarification, quite useful, this one. So you have a closed response item, and afterwards you ask the following. If you answered other, please specify. And possibly sentence completion. One thing I liked about this course is, and you supply the answer. Types of closed response items. Alternative, so did you study abroad during your undergraduate studies? Yes, no. Right. Dichotomous, some people call that. Multiple choice, student status, etc. Rating scale. Study abroad was well integrated into my studies. So they rate from strongly agree to strongly disagree. It's a scale of rating. Rank order. How much time did your students spend in class on the following? Listening to lectures, speaking, reading, writing. And so respondents would indicate, 1 through 4, 1 the most amount of time, 4 the least amount of time. So at this stage, let us pause and do something slightly hands-on. You don't have this handout yet. You'll get it soon. But when you get it, read the open response items in section 1 of the handout, questions 1 through 7, and just see if there's anything problematic or unusual about the items. You might even discuss it amongst yourselves. Yuki and Bonnie kindly are going to submit that to you, and we'll talk about it later. So it's a mock survey, right? Study abroad program survey for the Department of Mermish. University of Atlantica. Mermish, someone said, what? Mermish is spoken in Atlantica in The Little Mermaid, the movie? No? No one's got kids. That's much. Well-informed. Let's see, this is for you. Yeah, they don't speak English, as my daughter maintains. It's Mermish. What they said. What did you see that stands out? Yeah. Oh, no, it's fake. Yeah, it's fake.
No, this is how it looks. No, this is the actual survey that they would get.
In Mermaid Land? Yeah, sure. Mermaid, sorry? The first section, section 1. Yeah, that's right. So we're just maybe shout out what you saw, anything unusual or problematic, but just section 1, just section 1.
I don't care for your answers to anything except question number 1.
That's very interesting. So it's actually good. So the rest should be eliminated. This is your survey.
No, this is what the message I get when I receive it.
Right, good. I see what you mean. Yeah, right. Perfect. Yeah.
I would put question 1 and 2.
You wouldn't put question 1 and 2?
This way.
Really? No, this is all intentional. To demonstrate some problems.
There are a lot of weaknesses in this program because you have the space that is devoted to weaknesses. It's much more than strength.
Indeed.
You assume that they have a lot to write in that section.
Exactly.
But not necessarily, it's just like, this is what I want to know, the rest isn't really important.
Nice. Yeah.
For 3 and 4, it seems like you're too broad of a question.
Could be.
You want to say find what most valuable, and then you would also think about what realm most they find it most valuable, the cultural aspect. Is that what you want to find out in that part, and then also what about the actual language learning,
Yeah.
language acquisition?
So you might want to itemize that a bit.
Exactly.
Tease that out. Sure.
Let's see.
Something slightly more concrete? Indeed. The next time I write a mock survey, I'll consider some of these issues. There are a few things that I'm after in particular, so let me move on. But those, I think all of those are very good. The first point to be made, and it was made by this gentleman here. Oh, no, prior to that. The advice is to keep these items to a minimum. Use them sparingly. There's just too many. There's, what have I got here, 9. Potentially. Right? So the advice is not so many of these. The other aspect of this, generally the guideline is to put them at the end of a survey, not at the beginning. The idea is to generate some interest, maybe even rapport with the closed response items, things that are easier to fill out, and then give them the harder work at the end of the survey. One exception to that rule, if you think the closed response items are going to influence how someone might respond in an open response item, then put the open response item first. There might be an ordering effect, so you'll just have to decide. The final one, which was identified, there's just too much space for the first question and too little space for these questions. Too little space to answer is a problem, but as precisely as pointed out, too large, a lot of space sends the message that maybe this is really what the survey developer is interested in. Too little space, they don't care about those answers so much. Allow appropriate responses for spaces. Allow appropriate spaces for responses. And that's all. So strengths and weaknesses of open response items. They can be exploratory in nature. There's a wide range of possible answers. You can get richness, descriptions of dynamic phenomena. They yield graphic examples and illustrative quotes. They enable free expression of opinions. They're relatively easy to write for the developer. And I think that's all. Weaknesses. They're time-consuming to complete. They're mentally taxing. They're labor and writing intensive to answer. They have an essay test-like aspect, which is potentially threatening. They get skipped. Prone to be left blank, and they get skipped. Bear that in mind.
You missed one.
Do let us know.
They're very hard to quantify.
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. More labor intensive for data analysis. Yeah, someone's got to go in and read all that stuff and do something with it. I mean, it is sort of quantifiable, but But in general, I think you're right. It's not quantifiable like closed response items. Absolutely. Yeah. Good. Thank you. More troubleshooting. Look one more time at the handout, if you will. Number one, read the closed response items now in section 2 of the handout. So these are items, 1 through 8 in section 2. Again, do you notice anything unusual or problematic? And discuss that with a partner. Okay, let's go through these. We'll go through these together, individually, one by one. So number one, on average, how many times did you write during the week? Problems with this? So I didn't. Someone sneezed. I didn't hear that. What was what?
There's the emphasis and also question number 5 as well on the homework assignments. Both 1 and 5 they're emphasizing quantity, not the kind of like the questions I thought should be asking how many hours do you spend doing this type of
Could do.
I don't know, that's what I
Yeah, sure. If that's what you wanted to know, right?
That's really like
Yeah. That might be the more relevant thing to find out about. Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, ask the teachers and get the same information.
Yeah. Indeed. The thing that I'm looking for, though, all of these, I think these are correct. The thing I'm looking for, write's a bit too general. I mean, that was the particular thing that I was after. Maybe a bit more specific about what you mean by write. On average, how many times each week do you write short materials, maybe such as emails, grocery lists, or to-do lists? More class time should be spent on reading and listening activities. Problem with this? Yeah, it's called a double-barreled answer. You've asked people to rate their agreement on 2 things, reading and listening. They might have different rates of agreement for both of those. 2 separate items. More class time should be spent on reading activities, a separate one for listening, or whatever one. 3, I believe that the free writing assignments that we did every week at the start of class are useful for improving my writing. Problem here? A bit wordy. Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Item number 1, it doesn't work.
So maybe an order problem. Yeah, sure. I agree. Also a bit wordy, a bit in the eye of the beholder, but the important thing is the guideline is don't be too wordy. Don't use superfluous language. That could be said simpler. The free writing assignments were useful for improving my writing. 4, would you characterize the motivation of students as being primarily linked to achievement? Finish it. Just what? Just too much to deal with. Simple, direct language, familiar to respondents. That's caused some real consternation in the audience. Is getting a high grade the main motivation for students? Bit of a problem with that revision as well. Is getting a high, this is not on the survey, is getting a high grade the main motivation for students? Problem with that one? Not on the handout. Leading, it could be leading. Yeah, indeed. Maybe a more neutral statement of that. The other problem with this is that you should maybe avoid questions the respondent can't answer. Ask that student about their motivation. Don't ask them to speculate about the motivations of others, perhaps. So getting good grades motivates me to work hard. Something like that. Try and move on. On average, how many homework assignments do you complete each week? How many homework assignments do you complete each week? Hint. Perfect. Avoid socially desirable responses, right? So there's a tendency, someone might exaggerate. One way to revise that, is it a challenge to complete the weekly homework assignments? Maybe you just want to ask about something else. What class activities were most helpful for learning? Problem. Ding, ding, ding. Make answer choices exhaustive. Very often that problem is solved simply by putting an other category. What class activities are most helpful for learning? Blah, 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 blah. Other, please satisfy. They have an opportunity to supply the missing option choice. I do not dislike the in-class reading assignment. That was spotted early, so it's obvious. Avoid double negatives. I like the in-class reading assignments. Just good writing, perhaps. The amount of daily homework should be increased. Someone raise Nice. Perfect. Yeah. Exactly right. So the problem here, avoid leading prompts and answer choices. It leads. A slightly more neutral expression. The amount of daily homework assigned is, too much, too little, just right, etc. And as Martha points out, the answer responses are skewed towards agreement. It's two choices and only one for disagreement. So, strengths and weaknesses of closed response, right? Strengths, relatively easy to answer, more uniformity across items. They're less likely to be skipped, right, because they're easy to answer. Relatively easy to code and analyze, especially if you get a file from an online survey tool. You can use statistical analysis with these. Weaknesses, a narrower range of responses, lacking an exploratory aspect. They're tricky to write. You might run into a few of these little pitfalls. Not anymore. Before this workshop. And that's all. So at this point, maybe you've got a set of items. And let me just pause and make this point that if you've been clear about who's using the information, what they're going to use the information for, and what you're interested in finding out about, the evaluation question. You went through those steps first. You listed your indicators, what the phenomena are. And on that base, you decided a survey was an appropriate choice. And so you had a number of information needs, and these led to a whole series of survey items. And had you gone through this process, my argument would be that there was rather a strong link between the information that was going to come out of those items and the things that you want, and what you wanted to use that information for specified prior. So these steps are supposed to enable useful information coming from your surveys. Move on. Oh, and that's use-driven evaluation. The beginning steps of use-driven evaluation. Moving on. So we've talked about determining information needs, writing items. The next step is formatting the layout. A few tips. Formatting typically involves the following components. Your survey should have a title. It should have an introduction, items, which we've talked about, obviously, and parting information. What should go in the title? The title should have simple and direct language, generate interest to the extent possible, avoid acronyms, capture the overall survey topic, if possible. The introduction could contain the following. Describe the survey purpose, stress its importance. Identify the individuals who are administering the survey. Who's giving this? Describe the information use. Provide assurances of confidentiality and anonymity. And also maybe explain that this might be where you put your consent information if you've had to go through an ethics review board at your institution. The time needed to complete the survey and the value of the respondent's participation. Anything else? Contact information. I'll explain why. And possibly a brief outline of survey sections. Items we've talked about. Parting information. This should be on a separate page if the survey is online. Expressions of gratitude. Thank you. Additional instructions, so please press enter to save your responses, things like that. Contact information. And the address, if it's a mailed survey. And the reason for this is that very often, if you mail a survey out, you'll provide a self-addressed and postage-provided envelope. The address is there. People will lose that. And if they're still keen to send in the survey, they still have the address on the survey itself. So another look at this, if you don't mind, if you can bear it. This time, though, consider the look and the layout of the survey. Maybe some of the ordering issues that came up earlier. Do you notice anything unusual or problematic with respect to how it looks, how the items are ordered, etc.?
No title. I don't like the font.
Okay, let's just shout this out. Yeah.
No title. No title.
No title? Study abroad program survey, Department of Mermage. There's a lot of. Yeah. Well, maybe the title's not obvious. Yeah, I mean, yeah, sure. Yeah.
Too much in one.
Cluttered, crowded, indeed.
Especially when it comes to the multiple choice answers. There is not enough space between the different items.
Yeah, avoid that, definitely, yeah. Online tools will do a lot of this stuff for you, right? I mean, if you're making a paper-based survey, then these are the things to look out for. Other things?
Purpose of the survey?
Yeah, well, there's no introduction at all, right, to speak of. There's just, oh, the Department of Miramichi College of Arts and Sciences, blah, 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 just that little blurb. It doesn't tell you much. Yeah.
Consistency, because sometimes for, when they're multiple choice and they're 4, sometimes they're 5.
Yeah, right. Indeed. It's out of place. Hey, right. Maybe somewhere else. Yeah. Well, look, let's consider some of these together. So the appearance of the survey, it should be visually attractive and user-friendly. You know, that's a nice mermaid icon. I think you'll all agree. No small or difficult to read fonts. Those are small and difficult to read, I think. You can use different fonts to emphasize key information. Paper-based, economical use of space, but not crowded, cluttered layouts. I think this is a bit crowded and a bit cluttered. High-quality printing and copying paper, et cetera, et cetera. That's all. Length. Less than 4 to 6 pages, paper-based. Less than 30 minutes. As a guide. That's a bit of an arbitrary sort of rule, but as a guide. Ordering. 1 column per line for online. Avoid multiple columns and layouts. Often online tools will do that for you. Number sections and subset sections and items. Avoid extensive branching. So you can say, if you answered yes to this question, please go to section 3. If you answered, right. Keep that to a minimum. Sensitive questions at the end of the survey, right? So potentially, what are the weaknesses of the program? That might be a bit threatening. People might not want to answer that right away. Put it at the end. Put it at the end, potentially threatening. Grouping, a subtitle for each group or section. Instructions at the beginning of each subsection or group of items. Items together by content. It's a bit of a mix, right? Sometimes we're talking about classes, then it's courses, then it's assessment. You know, for example, the question 4 on motivation, maybe that should just be somewhere else completely. Questions 5 and 8 are about homework. Maybe put those together at the end, possibly. And items together with the same response format. Put those together. It saves time and cognitively less demanding for, say, for all the rating scales. That's a bit difficult to see. I know you can see it. So, all of these rating scales in section 2, they could all just go in this format, right? Just the prompt, across the top, the ratings, and just buttons in the middle. Easier. So moving on. You've got a survey, right, in hand. You've got a draft of this thing. The next step might be to edit it or review it. Who might you get to do this? What?
No, the person who wrote this, but yeah.
Right. Yeah, right. Obvious one. Yeah, right. Someone else. Among those someone else group, who would you choose? Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to have access to YouTube.
Yeah.
If I see her online, I say, Yuki, please,
Yeah. Yuki. Just move on. Yeah. An expert.
Seriously, I think that it's a good way, if you are doing evaluation and trying to do it yourself, involving people that are much more highly trained from you at a later stage. You get a lot of the groundwork so that you don't have to take too much of their time.
Yeah.
But get that really good feedback, polish it up, and make sure that you're really doing it right. It's a really good way to use external.
Indeed. So an expert of some kind.
Yes.
But toward the latter stages, I think that's a nice point. Yeah. Well, yes, that person. A friend. Yes, definitely, those people. Basically, anybody who's willing to read it, right? Really. Would you? Yeah, sure. Thanks. Yeah. Perhaps the highest priority person would be the decision makers, maybe yourselves, whoever's using this information to make decisions. They should look at it. Right? They should look at it. Why? Because they're the ones who are going to be ultimately using that information. So they should get the survey and they should maybe think about the information that's going to come back. They should think about their uses. Remind them of the uses, or remind yourselves of the uses. Remind yourselves of questions that you specified prior. And ask yourselves, okay, if I get this information, is it going to help me use the information that I want to use it? Is it going to help me to answer those questions? Yeah.
Are we missing the checking the validity of your survey set?
Yeah. Yes, we are. Here's the answer. You know.
So that's not really private.
It is a validity check. This piloting is coming later. Yeah. And when you say validity, actually, I start thinking in terms of like statistical validity, maybe, or item check.
I meant checking that the question that you asked actually asks what you think that you asked.
Yeah, maybe piloting. Yeah, I think would do that, and it's coming up. But yeah. Other people, well, basically, I think that's anybody who will read it category, right? Faculty, administrators, lecturers, students. But also maybe local experts, faculty with survey research experience, colleagues elsewhere with survey expertise. So like in the social sciences, public policy, marketing, they really know about surveys, those folks. And then if you have a local assessment office, they'd be ones to have review it as well. Are we at piloting? We're at piloting now. Testing it, essentially, for the very reasons that were pointed out. Who might, well, yeah, who might you pilot the survey with? Which is to say, who would you give it to test the survey? Them, these people. People similar to the target respondents, obviously, but not the target respondents themselves. Someone who is similar in profile to that group. You can get written feedback. Just give it to them. Please write on what you think and provide plenty of space so that they can mark it. You can do this online as well. One way that might be not so obvious to you, think aloud. Are you familiar with this? Essentially the same as just having written feedback, but while the respondent does it, you ask them to talk about what their experience and thinking. Like, oh, yeah, okay, I would answer this. Oh, this doesn't make any sense. And a survey developer sits with them and makes a note of all of these thoughts. The other possibility is just to do a pre-administration, send it out to a group. If you have that option, if there's enough people. This can be useful for high-stakes types of surveys where it needs to be right before it goes out. And when the information comes back, you can check for things like consistently skipped items. You have to analyze the data in a little bit of way, more information on that. So we finished developing the survey. It's ready to go. It's piloted. You think you've got a finished product. Now is the time to send it out. Right? Send it out to people. A couple of issues on this topic. Sampling to consider. Mail, the mode of administration. Should it be mailed, sent online, or provided online? In person. Important issue is worrying about or increasing response rate, ensuring response rate is as high as possible. Let's talk about sampling. All right, there's two options here. You can take a census, so everybody in the population, right? Everybody, the students, you want to know about students, send it to all students, all your first year students, or you can take a sample. So what might impact that decision? Why, in what circumstances would you take a sample, do you think, or what circumstances would you take a census? Yeah, I didn't hear. Where was that? The size of the group. Yeah, so which?
If it's huge, then you might be more likely to.
Yeah, indeed. Oh, sorry, I should have said there's two types of sampling, random and non-random. Exactly, the size of the population. So if you've got a huge group, it makes sense to take a sample. Yeah.
The government samples everybody.
Oh.
They do a census.
Right.
Non-sample.
So maybe you really need to know from everyone. For some reason, you really need to know everyone's opinions. You really, really do need to generalize to that group. Yeah, possibly. A sample would do that as well, but a census would do it better. Right? A random sample. Yeah. Others. Feasibility. Skip that one. Access. Skip that too. Diversity. Okay. You might have a very diverse group of students, say, and you want to get at that diversity. You want to get at heritage language students, whatever. So you need to generalize to that. Maybe you want to get the whole census, or you want to take a random sample. One possibility. The need to generalize. So a census gets at everybody. Yeah.
Diversity, you said either random or non-random?
No. Either a census or a random sample.
Why would you want random for diversity?
You want to capture that diversity, right? A random sample allows.
So you don't want it to be random. You want to make sure that each group within your diverse population is represented somehow within your sample.
Yeah, well then you could do a stratified random sample. Yeah, that would get at that. Indeed. That's the next workshop. But it couldn't be like a non-random sample, right? Well, maybe it could be. But you could, for sampling, typically that allows you to generalize to the group. So if you took a stratified random sample, that would allow you to do it. Uses and purposes. Now, you may have no need whatsoever to generalize to a group. You may just be interested, for example, in trawling for a few good ideas from a few key respondents. And a non-random sample would give you information to do the things that you want to do. Like, you want to get just a few good ideas for program improvement. Right? You don't need to know what everyone thinks. You just need a few good ideas. A non-random sample, not representative, would allow you to do that. Mail online or in person. So you can mail it. It can be online, typically an email. Or a group administration. You have everyone in a room and they take the survey. What might be some of the advantages or disadvantages of any of these?
Response, percentage of people responding.
So response rate for...
Less likely it's in person.
Less likely?
Less likely that people would decline.
Right, would decline.
It's double negative. I'm trying to...
Yeah, if you want a high response rate, do a group administration. Get all the students in a language lab. Get all of the faculty at the faculty meeting. Right? That's 100% response rate of whoever showed up that day. Right? It's going to be a lot of people. Yeah. Yeah. Track them. And give it. So, that's a high response. Other thoughts, advantages, or disadvantages?
Cost?
Yeah.
Both monetary and time.
Cost and time. Right. So cost and time for online, maybe.
And money.
Yeah, definitely. Well, let's go through a few. Some of these are covered. Strengths for mailing it. Marking outside of option choices. These are in no particular order. Sometimes it's useful, if you have a piece of paper, the respondent can go, oh, circle, question mark. I don't understand what you're talking about. That can be quite useful information to have. Access to respondents, it's not so relevant now, but most people get mail. Not everyone gets email, maybe. Anonymity, real anonymity. Drawbacks, cost, as we said. Paper consumption, data collection and organization. If you have a bunch of paper surveys, the information that comes back to you has to be transferred from the paper into a computer of some kind to start to use it. That's time consuming, prone to error. Space restrictions. Marking outside of option choices is also a drawback. People will put in like 3.5, for a 1-5 scale, or an extra box in their own, option. Tick. I like this one. Online. There are a number of, if you don't know, there are a number of online survey tool providers, and there's more information on these here. The strengths of this: cost effectiveness, cheap. Item design flexibility. Instantaneous dissemination. People get it as soon as you hit send on the email. Fast automatic data collection, tabulation, and organization. You just get a file. Open it in SPSS or Excel. Branching, piping, randomization. Remember branching. If you answered yes, please go to question 3. You have to say that on a paper. It just does it automatically. Piping is when you have a response prior in the survey, and that information appears later. Boom, it pops up and shows people that information so you can ask a related question. Randomization of items as well to prevent any ordering effects. Drawbacks. Requires computer access and literacy. That might not be such a problem for some of the constituencies that you'll be dealing with. No marking outside of the option choices. Multiple responses. And what this means is somebody can sit down on a computer, answer the survey, and then not finish it, wander off to another computer and enter in their responses there. And that looks like 2 different respondents. One didn't finish it, one did, and you don't know. Anonymity is not strictly guaranteed. It's pretty good, but frankly, the fact is, people, if you really tried hard, could be tracked to a computer if you really wanted to. Strengths for the group administration. High response rates, we've talked about it. You have a captive audience. They're all there, just give it to them. Drawbacks is they have to be there. It requires physical attendance on the administration day. Pressing on. So an important aspect of survey research is getting as high a response rate as possible, especially if you've taken a sample or a census. Or I should say, especially if you want to generalize to that population, and especially if you want to generalize to the population. So if you did that, right, imagine that's the group of people you sent your survey to, and that many people responded. What's the response rate? You get a prize for somebody who guesses the correct response rate. That group, that many responded. What do you reckon the response rate is? 10%? 5? 3? 9? 13? There's no prize. But that's the response rate. It's a problem. Why? You know, yeah. It's regarded as non-response error. You've got a self-selecting group, right? You've got the annoyed people, or you've got the really happy people. Whatever. You don't have everyone. You don't have the entire census, and you don't have the entire randomly selected sample. So you need to get response rate as high as possible. Crucial. Yeah. I wish you hadn't asked. No. That's the crucial question, right? It's arbitrary.
But the higher the number, the better chance it is 10%. No?
Well, the higher the number, the better. The more able you are to say, yes, this is a representative group, or yes, this is the whole group. I'll get to that later, but just to answer the question now, 100% is the answer. But I've seen quoted, anywhere between 60 to 90%. If you have a contract with the federal government, I read this in a book, I don't know how current this is, but if you have a contract with the federal government, you're doing survey research, they require 75%. So take that how you will. That might motivate you to get, in all sorts of different ways. But that's a guide, I think. That's a guide. Ways to increase your response rate. A few tips. Create a respondent-friendly questionnaire, right? So it should be nice to look at. Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. That's not here, but yeah. There's a reason it's not here, but absolutely, that's the key one. Personalized correspondence, maybe address it to someone in particular. Dear that person's name, if possible. Assure confidentiality and anonymity. Choose some optimal email or mail dates in an administration period, so avoid busy periods. Provide sufficient time to complete the survey and for follow-up reminders. That is to say, a sufficient, like a week or 2 weeks or something. And provide clear deadlines. Provide an explanation about the importance of the survey and the value of respondent opinions. Provide survey instructions. Multiple contacts and notifications. So a pre-notification. So if this was students, you might advertise it in classes before it goes out, through advisors. Follow-up reminders. You could track non-responders and send reminders just to those individuals. Send a replacement questionnaire if it's mail. Issues unique to mailing surveys. Provide a cover letter, a stamped self-addressed envelope, right? Enable them to just mail it back easily. And put the address somewhere on the questionnaire for the reasons I described earlier. Email, avoid spam language in your email correspondence. And spam filter might snatch it, and they never see it. And one possibility is to follow up with a mailed survey. So if the email didn't work, possibly send a mailed one, maybe. Yeah, the needed response rate. That was coming at that time, 75%. If you don't get it, if you got 25%, this isn't to say that you can't generalize. You would if you were reporting, you would simply have to say, we only got 25% response rate, therefore we interpret the results with caution. But you might have, you still might need to have to take decisions on the basis of the data that you have, right? So you just have to. The what? Oh. Yeah. Good. Fix it. Yeah. Let's move on. We're,
since so many of us, if you don't mind,
yeah.
do surveys in classes with
Yeah.
students,
Yeah.
I think it's nice and it sends the students, if you can possibly, pick classes to have them go into a lab to do it. Because besides the response rate thing, it lets them know that you really think this is important
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Send that message. Yeah, sure. I agree. Yeah. They resent it. Mm. Well, there you go. Well, then email. Email in that case, if you've historically had that problem. They, yeah, right. Even in class, they don't respond. Mm.
How many do you have? A survey.
But they don't fill out that one, you know, because it's in class. Right? Like, oh.
I'm just curious, how many surveys do they have to take per semester or not? Or what is it?
They have one survey and then they have an exit exam. But they see that this is a waste of class time. So try to do it online and then do it at home.
That's very interesting.
And the result is like 50%.
Well, you don't need to include them in your survey anyway because they don't represent students.
They are
They represent brainiacs and most students.
these are our students.
We did, and we're running short on time, but I'll just throw this out, that we did a study at Northern Arizona University a few years ago when I was working there on this issue, and we found that careful explanation of the value of the survey actually made a difference. And so some of the students, after we went to the effort of sort of clarifying these things, after we had the teachers sort of presented in lots of light and things like that actually drove response rates up. And so that's one strategy. It's not going to eliminate the problem that they do.
I think one problem is that our students come for a semester or a year and they leave us. I mean, we feel that they should be
Yeah. There's a comment.
I didn't hear you talking about taking any measures for making sure that the surveys are not filled out randomly. And I think there are two ways to do that. One is including controlled questions, so that later you could see the correlations between these two similar questions, and if they show positive correlations, I mean there's no problem. Or before the last stage, you may send the survey to a clinic to see if there's anything wrong with its thickness. And I think that there are electronic programs that would do that diagnosis as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of statistical approaches to ensuring item reliability. I think that might go in that category. The sort of thing you're talking about. That would be the next workshop. But certainly, yes. Maybe it's suffice to say, and there's more information on that here, that there are statistical approaches to checking that people are responding to the items in the way that they should. It requires certain things. There should be constructs, and it's usually analysis of multi-item scales. But yeah, definitely. What's the point here? There are ways to check that. There are ways to check that, and they're here. Yeah, but it goes a bit beyond the scope of this, I thought. Yeah.
Also thinking maybe another way to combat student burnout on taking surveys might be consider, students often don't see the results of the survey.
Yeah.
It's the kind of survey where they might actually be interested in the results, and it's okay for them to see the results. You tell them from the beginning, you're going to see the results. And then they're more interested.
Yeah. Did you want to comment?
Sorry, yes. Exactly the case that I was mentioning earlier about the surveys that we do in the College of Literature. That's one of the reasons why we introduced in our department this regular meeting with all of the stakeholders, including students, about the outcomes of the survey, because it drives up the importance in their minds. Yeah? So they see that indeed we're taking seriously and acting upon it. And that then generates, I think, interest in the next, enthusiasm in the next round of surveys. Take it seriously.
Yeah. Let me press on since I'm a bit short for time. So you've administered your survey, and you've got some data, perhaps. And that would be the next topic of the workshop. In fact, there are quite a lot could be said on this topic. It involves coding and entering and cleaning data if it's a paper-based survey, analyzing closed response data, analyzing open response data, presenting that data, and interpreting that data. A lot could be said. A lot of that's discussed here, but I'm just going to very briefly go through maybe some of the common steps and common procedures that would probably arise and things that you might want to pursue in further detail in here and other texts. Before that, a few things to think about when organizing and analyzing your data. So organize data to answer evaluation questions and enable information uses. Think about who should be involved. Should decision makers be involved? And watch out for inappropriate data manipulation. Is data analysis expertise available, either within or beyond your program? And what are attitudes towards data analysis and interpretation generally? What is credible and trustworthy analysis in decision makers' eyes? And what I mean by this, an example would be, if you had a lot of qualitative data, one way to ensure that that data is valid would be to have two people code the data and then calculate intercoder reliability to see whether or not they're coding in the same way and whether or not the codes that come out of that process are reliable. Now, maybe nobody knows what that is in your program and nobody cares. In which case, you don't have to worry about doing that type of thing. You don't need those sorts of statistical procedures, right? Don't bother with it. Very quickly, coding. If you have a paper-based survey, you're going to need to transfer that information into a database. First step, right? So it needs to go there. Typically, that would mean coding the data, which means giving every textual response a numerical signifier, right? Enter that into a spreadsheet. Clean the data. You would need to look for missing values or anomalous values, like you've got a rating scale from 1 to 5 and you've got a 6 or a 7. That's a bit good. You need to check for that stuff. Other things as well. This stage is very prone to human error, so be careful. Analyzing and presenting, let's say, closed and open response data. So let's say you get some open response data like that. A spreadsheet might look like that, a bunch of numbers, right? Things you might, your qualitative data will look like that, a bunch of text in rows. For closed response data, you might consider the following possibilities for analyzing it. Response rate, calculate response rate, calculate maybe descriptive statistics. You could do cross-tabulation, inferential statistics, item reliability. We talked about that before, internal consistency. Look at that here. At the minimum, though, you should calculate response rates. And also, there's a rather good chance, that you'll be calculating descriptive statistics as well, right? So, what might it look like? If you had a multiple choice item, right? Student status, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, graduate student, you might need that information. How many people are each? Percentages as well, totals as well. You might need them. You might need to present that information in the following way. Pie chart, good for comparing sections to the whole. Bar chart, good for comparing categories to each other. That one's bigger than that one. The recommended one, though, I would say is a table. Let's see which is most efficient. Closed, that should say closed, yeah. Presenting closed response data. Information might look like this in the spreadsheet, and typically what you need to do is some kind of coding, looking for common categories, right? Oh, that said a lot, that said a lot. Using those categories as codes to analyze, or like that said a lot, that said a lot, that said a lot, that said a lot. Let's go through and see how frequently those things have been said. You look for patterns. Are there any relationships between the categories? More information here. Presentation could look like this in a table. Typically, the organization of categories will be by theme. Right. I don't know if you can see that, but that says you got strengths and weaknesses. There's a lot of those, right? Under strengths, quality of teaching, dedication of faculty, study abroad, right? Weaknesses, course availability, facilities. These are your categories that you found during the coding process, and maybe the frequency of these, how many people said that stuff. That's very brief. It's a real overview. Refer to that in other texts for more information. Someone has to interpret the data. Someone has to draw conclusions. So a few things to think about on that topic. Who will interpret? Whose perspective matters here? Should interpretations be checked? Are other perspectives necessary? Is triangulation necessary to confirm findings with other sources? Data manipulation can happen at this stage. One recommendation is have more than one decision maker involved in the interpretation process, so that's a negotiated type of conclusion that they arrive at. Who draws conclusions? Who recommends? Are interpretations and recommendations evident from the data? And if so, are they stated so decision makers and others can understand? So we're getting towards the end. You'll now need to report results. Reporting is key. It's crucial. If it's done poorly, if the wrong thing is said to the wrong person at the wrong time, all of that good evaluation work is undone. It's for nothing and unused. So it's bad. Should be informative, timely, accessible, meaningful, and relevant. Consider the audience, maybe the medium and the message. Right? Tailor the report to the audience, the format and the content. Consider their knowledge levels. Beware of technical language and concepts. Consider time constraints and availability. Choose an appropriate venue, date, and time. The medium, so maybe different formats for different audiences and purposes. And one thing to consider here is interactivity. It may well be that during the reporting stage, the interpretation happens. Like you show everyone the data, and it's at that point during a meeting that people think about what it means. In that case, you might want to have a more interactive format. These are not very interactive. A written report, research monograph, executive summary, brochure, newsletter, article, poster, so on and so forth. These are fine, but they're not interactive. Presentation, workshop, online, communication, online conference, meeting, these are more interactive. If interpretation is happening at this stage, then maybe these are a better option. The message, no surprises, no nasty surprises. Attention on uses and questions. So go back to those initial planning components, right? Draw links between findings and questions. Clear, feasible guidance for the future. Cast negatives positively. Valued organizational learning and opportunities for change. That's pretty much the end. But let me leave you with a few examples from language program evaluation projects that have used surveys and used them effectively, in my opinion. So classroom types of evaluation projects. Student learning, people were trying to find out student learning expectations, whether classes are meeting expectations, helpfulness of classroom activities and assessments. Development of a teacher training program and needs analysis. Talked about that one before. Effectiveness of study abroad for language and cultural development. The academic quality of study abroad programs for foreign language degree requirements. Assessment. Levels of oral written proficiency achieved by the end of required sequences. So this is self-assessment. So self-rating. To what degree do you feel you are able to do X? Very well, not so well. Felt gains in cultural knowledge, understandings, and perspectives. Student perceptions of the value of foreign language learning and resulting behaviors, dispositions. Impact of outside factors on outcome learning, so study abroad, heritage status, previous second language experiences. Determining support for program changes. Effectiveness of new programs and curricula. Getting at the nature of program identity. This is what people were interested in. And what did they use the information for? Redesign of course assessments, development and refinement of new courses, assessments, student learning outcomes, teaching materials. Better understandings of student backgrounds and expectations. Program teaching needs, effectiveness of program information and impact on course enrollment. Development of a teacher training course. Cancellation of some study abroad programs. Replacement with other programs. Changes in requirements for minors. They couldn't go to some programs. They could go to other programs. And they found out this information on the basis of surveys. And student study abroad orientation and training. Students were just going to have a good time. They found that out using a survey, so they needed an orientation. No, not a good time studying. Better understandings of student perceptions of learning outcomes, right? Course syllabi, curricular adjustments, changes in pedagogical practice, demonstration of merit and the value of foreign language requirement in assessing stated outcomes. If you have accreditation requirements, they require you to do outcomes assessment. Self-rated outcomes assessment is regarded as assessment data. Indirect assessment data, but assessment data. Administration approved degree name change, addition of a study abroad component to a curriculum, and just a better understanding of the distinctiveness and value of the program. And I might just add one final comment here that these were all foreign language educators who took control of evaluation in their own programs, sort of took ownership of it, and used it in sort of self-determined ways and productive ways, and used surveys doing that. At this point, there's something else. How am I for time? And questions, etc. Yes, I got an hour and 15. Yeah, okay, good. That's all. Questions? Oh, yeah. Questions. Oh, there, okay. Thank you. Questions?
I have a comment, not a question, another comment. And it's really just a warning that if you don't know about, you should be aware of. In attempting to increase response rates in a survey that we were doing at the University of Hawaii, we had the clever idea that we borrowed, of course, from public policy people and things like that, to try to do a raffle where we would give incentive by you as a result of responding to the survey, you're entered into a raffle and you get to win a car. It wasn't a car,
From American Airlines.
yeah. And so, we thought, well, maybe that'll get us 50% instead of 20%, which we typically get. Well, it turns out that's illegal.
In Hawaii.
You can't do that in the state of Hawaii because it's considered gambling. And we would have actually been violating the law doing that. So, word of warning, check. Make sure that your state authorizes that kind of gambling before you do any kind of a raffle or incentive-based.
How about grades?
I think, sorry?
Grades?
Grades and money are also in ethically shady ground, and our IRB would not let that happen from the institutional perspective.
And
there's other reasons you want to think about grades, probably. Yeah.
We tried to have it be a part of like a graduation requirement to fill out the survey. Like you had to go and have a meeting. And, like it was part of the checklist of things to do before you could graduate, and we weren't allowed to.
What?
We weren't. This is that's right. Yeah. Right. If I could just add a comment to that, the comment came up during, what's a good way to increase response rate, and that was some type of enticement, right? And the reason, and that's in the literature, like, how do you get response rate? Give them some money. That's like the first one at the top of the list, right? It's not mentioned there, I think, for these reasons. If you offer these enticements, you wonder what type of data you're getting. And if you offer something very, very attractive, it could just be tick, 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 give me that thing. And the quality of the data might be compromised, arguably. And there was a point made in an article by John, so I left it out. But certainly, it can be